Hi and welcome to the Global Travel Planning Podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Collins, who with my expert guests will take you on a weekly journey to destinations around the globe, providing travel inspiration, itinerary ideas, practical tips and more to help you plan your next travel adventure. Welcome to episode 10 of the Global Travel Planning Podcast. If you, like me, have yet to embark on a cruise and are wondering if it's for you or not, then this week's guest, Kylie Mitchell Smith's reflections on her own recent experiences of 2 Mediterranean cruises with Azamara certainly provides food for thought when considering whether to cruise or not to cruise. So, Kylie, would you like to introduce yourself to our podcast listeners and tell us all about what you do, what you write for, what you talk about on your podcast, and just generally an introduction?
Hi, my name is Kylie Mitchell Smith, and I am the traveling senorita, often referred to as the traveling senorita. I'm a travel journalist, podcast host, and I do media relations for destinations. So my whole working career has been in tourism, events, and hospitality.
Ah, fantastic. Yes. And we met last year actually at the Australian Society of Travel Writers dinner, didn't we, at Christmas?
We did. And I was so glad we met, Tracy, because you then alerted me to a conference. Because I'm all I want to do is travel, literally born with a passport in my mouth. You mentioned Kalamata in Greece. And I said, right, I'm going. Like, not really thinking I would be able to pull it off, but somehow we did. Wasn't that great?
It was. And that was a TBEX travel blogger exchange in Kalamata, which we went to in May, which was amazing. And of course, we kind of met up in Athens, didn't we, before we actually traveled to Kalamata. And I am just going to briefly share that story because that was quite amazing. And everybody I tell it to goes, you can't be serious. So I arrived in Athens, decided to go out for dinner. Now, if you've been to Athens, you will know there are a myriad of restaurants to choose from. So I walked down the street, was tempted into multiple restaurants by all these fantastic Greek guys telling me their stories and come into my restaurant, we have the best food. Eventually, I was tempted into this restaurant. He took me up the stairs. As I was about to sit down, I turned around and all I heard somebody shout across the restaurant was, Tracy! And that was you, wasn't it, Kylie?
Good old Aussie girl called Kylie yelled out, Tracy, in the middle of Athens. Now, that is uncanny because we could have gone into so many, as you said, different restaurants. And we were also hiding upstairs. They literally put us in like an attic.
I know. And then they put me up there with you as well. It's as if they knew too. It was amazing. And I've had a kick out of telling everybody that story because what are the chances of that? You'd flown in from New York. I'd flown in from London. And yet we happened to meet in a random restaurant in Athens.
I love that. And do you know what I also love about our friendship, Trace, is that you introduced me to the digital blogging world, which as a writer of like nearly 3 decades, I wasn't that aware of what was going on in that space. And then you often say to me that I guess I inspired you to do a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love listening to your podcast. So yes, and we will share that in the show notes, the Travel and Senorita podcast that Kylie, that's every week, isn't it? It's a weekly podcast, Kylie, that you put out.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I guess having a radio background, I'm better at the audio and yes, I'm a talker. And so I find that really easy to do. I mean, it's every week. I've done 177 episodes. So if you do the math on that, there's quite a few years pre-COVID, pre the trend of podcasting, but I love it. And it's not monetary for me per se. It's literally part of my storytelling, but it's the joy that I get every week from doing a podcast is why I do it. And the writing side is work basically.
Oh, no, that's fine. So, I'm just going to, because when you're scratching yourself, it's coming up on the audio. Just thought I'd let you know. It's interfering with the audio.
A professional podcaster right there. I can honestly say, Trace, I don't think I've ever been interviewed on a podcast.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, cool. So
that's crazy.
So after, obviously, we all went and had a fantastic time at the TBEX conference in Kalamata, but you afterwards were going on a cruise. Now, I was desperate to get onto this Azamara cruise. Unfortunately, I was not one of the chosen people to go on the cruise, but you did. And I've never been on a cruise. I'm a virgin cruiser. I have never actually had much of a desire to go on a cruise, but I was tempted last year because I thought, well, this would be interesting. So I thought what would be really cool to talk about with you is basically to cruise or not to cruise. That's the question, because that's often what I ask myself. Should I go on a cruise, or is that something that is not going to really fit my travel needs? So I thought it would be really good to ask you to answer that question. So, Kylie, should I cruise, or is it something that I should avoid? Tell me why I should cruise.
Well, firstly, you just mentioned a word, which is fit. So I'm a free independent traveler in the travel world, which means I do my own itineraries. I do my own thing. I'm incredibly rustic about going off the beaten path on land, usually not by sea. And so for me, cruising was not on my radar at all. But I happened to go in Brisbane to a launch of a cruise night. I thought I'll just test the water, excuse the pun. I must have spoken to the right person, because I said, I believe now, to one of the general managers of Azamara in Australia, that I have never cruised, I don't really get it, and I'm a fit traveller. And then they drilled down a little bit into what is it that you don't get about it. And I was like, well, I like to, meet the producers, and I like to meet artists, and I like to be really bespoke in my itineraries. And they said, we'll challenge you what you think of Azamara. Now, let me just put it into the picture of Azamara. There is plenty of cruise companies out there. And I have to give you the picture of Azamara because it only does about 500 to 600 passengers, and you've got the same ratio of staff. So it's quite apparently I went nearly to the top when I finally went on the cruise. Because when you get on the cruise, you meet people that are avid cruisers that have cruised all their lives, right? So you quickly realize that you're a virgin cruiser, you know nothing about it. I literally thought when I walked on the boat that I was going to have like gum boots and it was going to be wet and I was going to be in like a sailing boat. And I walked on and I was blown away by the carpet, the lifts, the spiral staircase. Like, it's just incredible when you hop on. So you are a bit overwhelmed at first. And I challenged myself. I took my 21-year-old son with me and we did Spain first. So we did a really good itineraries, 13-day intensive trip around Spain. So the caveats of cruising are the itineraries, which is what Azamara is really good at, bespoke itineraries, going to places that other big boats can't go to, using fresh produce and local food on the menu. So I saw them go into port and meet with the producers and get the food from that area. And I think it's also really important to have destination immersion. So they sort of come in at 6 a.m. in the morning and you go off. You literally go off the boat and you do whatever you want and you come back on as the sun sets, sometimes at 10 o'clock at night. Yeah, I think they're the three things that I was looking for, is a smaller experience, bespoke itineraries, and, economically adding to the destination that you go to.
Yeah, I think that those are quite important points for me as well. And I think one thing that concerns me about cruising is being on a large boat that arrives in a port and kind of decamps 3,000 people into a small destination. Now, I have experience of this because I was in Dubrovnik about 6 years ago, and a number of cruise ships had docked, and basically there were, I don't know how many thousands of people were trying to get through the Pillar Gate into the old city of Dubrovnik as we were trying to get out. Now, that's about maybe 4 meters wide and about 4 meters long tunnel. In fact, what ended up happening, because I get claustrophobic, so I had a panic, so I had to stand right back. They ended up having the cameras from the local TV station came. The police had to come. It was an incredibly dangerous situation, and how nobody was actually hurt in that is astounding, because I took video of it at the time because I was like, this is crazy. I've never seen anything like this. So that
about their Trace. I mean, who is actually governing that? Because I often think about the ports, like Santorini was one that we went into as well. And then Oya was just packed, and I felt really responsible for that because I hopped off a smaller cruise, but we were up against some really big boats. And I was thinking, who polices this? Like, yeah, it's an interesting concept. I know that you have to pay as a cruise ship to go in to the port and you pay for the pilot to come out. There is a whole commodity around it, but I'm not I've written a lot about death by popularity, whether it's in regional areas like Byron Bay, where I am now, or in Venice. And I'm not a fan of killing a destination with kindness, really, with too many people, basically. And that's something that I toyed with about cruising. But again, I don't know. I've done 2 with them now. I'll probably do another one next year. And funny you should say Croatia, because that will be the next one. And then we'll sail into Venice, which I never wanted to do on a cruise boat. So I'm deliberately doing that so that I can drill down and actually see whether I've got it right. Because so far, the 2 cruises that I've done, I've really enjoyed. And I think that Azamara have been incredibly thoughtful in how that they've curated those itineraries.
Well, that's certainly something that I'd be particularly interested to experience, since I've been on the other side of it when the cruise ship gets into port, to see how that is managed, because it was a very unpleasant experience. So I guess I got the kind of worst possible time or experience there, what happened in Croatia. So, and I know there are certain places that do get, Venice in particular is another area that I think we're going to stop cruise ships going in. I guess
we went to sorry to interrupt you there, but we went to the Grand Prix in Monte Carlo. And I was thinking that was incredible. Like, there was boats absolutely everywhere. And again, it seemed to be that Azamara knew how to navigate that, because I thought we'd get smashed. And they're super professional company, and they must have good relationships with the ports, because we were positioned really well. We weren't in thousands of people, which you'd imagine at a Grand Prix we would have been.
Yeah, yeah.
So we were sort of coming in at a different entry. I mean, obviously with an exclusive cruise line like that, you're paying for, I guess, those bespoke experiences at shore. Some of those that you're talking about, I mean, they would just be going into the main ports, and I don't know. Like, that's the problem with cruising, isn't it? Right there.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm thinking. It basically is that not all cruises are made alike. I guess that's the question, isn't it? Is that they're not all the experience you get on one cruise is not. And obviously, I talk to quite a lot of people on my UK travel planning a Facebook group and through that podcast, because we're often asked to recommend cruises around the UK, around the British Isles. And so, because I've obviously as yet not been on a cruise, so it's difficult for me to give experiences. But I know quite often we will get feedback about, it's this type of cruise, that type of cruise, because there seems to definitely be kind of that kind of hierarchy in terms of kind of the more basic to the very luxury end of the cruising market.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because I was wondering whether we'd just grown up. I was like, oh God, have I hit that age now that I cruise, right? Because you know me well enough to know I'm probably one of your most, I don't know, hippie friends, you'd probably call me.
Yes.
An urban hippie, something like that. And I think, like, if I can go on there and find the stories and meet the people that make up the cruising industry, then I think anyone can. Now, and it was also, yes, I was hosted by Azamara. I was lucky enough because I was there doing stories and podcasts and what have you, but I did do the math on whether it would be cheaper on land at the time. So this is last year in Spain, when Europe had just opened up, and it was really, really expensive everywhere, particularly in airfares and transport and hotels. And we worked out that it was cheaper to be on the boat than it was on the land, on an exclusive boat like Azamara. So there's another reason why people look at cruising. Again, would I do some caveat? I probably wouldn't, and I've said this actually in a newspaper article, so I have to stick by this. I wouldn't cruise necessarily in Australia or Asia. I wouldn't cruise over 500 to 600 people, as already mentioned. I'm pretty much thinking, for me, the Mediterranean and Europe is where I would cruise, because I just think, as you mentioned before, on land is so squished up and hard to navigate. And, we all remember those bloody suitcases on the cobblestone streets, because everything's so narrow. Yeah. You either miss a train or you get on a train, and it's all quite hectic. And I remember this from Paris down to Bordeaux, where we boarded the cruise, and my son and I missed the train in Paris, and it was all going wrong. And then we finally got to Bordeaux, and then we had to, pull these cases. And as soon as we got on the cruise, this is the bit that you'll love, everything is taken care of. You unpack into these gorgeous, like beautiful wooden wardrobes, and you never touch your suitcase again. And then you come into the ports on the, we had 13 days around. We did the whole of Spain, Bordeaux to Barcelona, and everything in between, including Portugal, Gibraltar. We went to like four countries or something in that 13-day trip. If you've got the energy, you can literally run around every town, see everything you need to see, hop back on board, have a chili margarita, beautiful food, and sail off into the sunset, get a great night's sleep, and off you go again. I can't see any downside to that. Can you?
No, you're selling it. You're selling it to me. You're selling it to me, Kylie.
Two, Trace, is that I had a 21-year-old with me. Now, this demographic on Azamara, because it's probably a little bit more exclusive, was definitely, I felt young, skinny and hot. I loved that. Because everybody was over, I'd say, I don't know. There was, I'm, early 50s. They would have been 65 plus maybe. Then we met some 90-year-olds and what have you. And then the demographic was really interesting. We met a lot of gay guys from like Norway and Luxembourg, and they were all hanging out. And, you had a lot of Americans on board that were in that sort of 65-year age group. And I had a 21-year-old with me who at first the Americans were saying, excuse me, sir, can I have a drink? So they thought he was one of the staff. But quickly, we worked out that everybody's in their own little posse. You don't have to hang with anyone. You can just do your own thing. And on this boat, there is 9 bars and restaurants for 500 or so people. So you can either kick back in your room and with a beautiful deck and watch the ocean go by, or you can just go to all the plethora of restaurants and things, or else go in the car library room and not be amongst anyone.
Because I was going to ask you that, because we're quite alike in that we both have very busy. We have very busy brains, and we like to be busy and doing stuff and kind of stimulated. We're both exactly the same.
Once.
So how did you? So obviously it appealed to you. You could keep yourself busy. There's enough things to choose from, enough activities.
Yeah, like I'm not a bingo sort of like trivia girl, so I kept away from those ones. But I love the spa and the steam room and having a shower in that gym area. So that's all accessible for general public at all times. And that seemed to be the spot where I could get some namaste. And then just being up on the top deck in the morning, watching the sunrise. And then, going down, and there's so many places to eat, and you can order breakfast in your cabin every morning. They'll just deliver it in there. Yeah, it's pretty nice. But the thing that I'm not a massive eater, and I mean that's the thing that I don't like to see gluttony either. It's not one of my favorite things to see. So I was really aware of that. I was like, okay, no, this is good, because I went and interviewed the chef on the podcast, and I said, I need to know about your wastage. So sustainability was really important for me on the boat as well. And I was convinced that they were using local produce, because I went down into the galley and checked it all out. They were baking bread every day. They were monitoring each restaurant for wastage and, turning it round and feeding staff. And I felt like they were really onto it at Azamara. They were using American and Australian beef. And other than that, I'm getting like fish from Galicia when they pulled into port, oysters from Bordeaux, cheeses from France. Yeah, I feel like they've got a really good grip on produce. And again, it's only, so I can't speak for other places than the Mediterranean.
And so the food that obviously it's all full board. You get everything provided once you set foot on the boat.
You do, and you get drinks as well in your package, and then they say to you, do you want to upgrade? And I honestly could see what I could upgrade to, because there was already Prosecco and wines and beer and spirits on the basic package. So it definitely is all inclusive. They're very generous with their food. They have Azamara evenings and stuff too, where you go up on shore. And one of them was in Ephesus in Turkey, where we saw the Nobel Prize winning choir perform, and they organise all that for you. And you can book itinerary tours each day, which a lot of the older people were doing, or you can just literally take off. And the other thing you do, like, nobody wants to kind of hang out and be in crowds, which is interesting, your initial point about Croatia. So on the boat, you tend to wait for people to get off because you've got, a lot of hours at port, and you don't rush off at the same time. It didn't seem to be hectic at all.
That's good. And then this year you did a slightly different cruise. So you started in Greece, or you started in France for this one this year?
We started in Athens, and then we went to Turkey, and then we went into the islands of Greece and into Crete, and then we went into Italy. So we did Sicily, Sardinia, Sorrento, and then we went into France, and then we went into Spain, into Menorca and Mallorca. So that's probably my favorite. If anyone listening wants to kick off a cruise to see what it's like, do the Islands of the Med cruise. It's like 12 days of all of the islands of the Med, and it's just incredible. And now,
so do you find that it did that just give you a taste though? Was it enough to kind of I don't know, satiate your appetite for those places, or was it enough did it make you hungry for more of those places? Or I'm trying to get a kind of, because I'm very much I like to immerse myself in an area. I like to meet the people in an area. I like to feel like, I have that kind of authentic experience when I'm visiting. How is it, when you come into port and you kind of spend a few hours in a destination? Do you think it makes people want to go back to see more, or do you think it gives that kind of superficial, okay, well, that's it, I've seen it, now I can tick it off kind of experience?
I think you've got to have energy. I think you've got to be an energetic person to do those sorts of itineraries. If you know what I mean. Like, I'm definitely in that. I love having ADHD as I get older because it's my superpower. And I could actually use that energy in a good way. But I don't know. I feel until 6 a.m. until sometimes it was 10 p.m. That's quite a long time to be in a place. Like, if you were to in a place for 3 days, if you think about it, you're going to waste a couple of those nights just kind of kicking back, relaxing, and then you'd be doing the same amount of activity hours, I reckon, in 3 days than what you do in a condensed one day, because, you're on a mission, you get a map and you get all of the history of the area. That's what Azamara give you. So you're on a mission to see things. But I always made sure in the day that we sat down somewhere and ate in a local restaurant. So I spoke to locals about where they were eating each time we went to port. I don't know if everyone would do that. Maybe some people are more into touristy stuff, but I was really, like you were saying, into like that organic experience. We definitely got time to do that. I had been to some of the places before, so I guess I was lucky enough in that sense. But my husband hadn't, and so I reckon he was a good example because he loves it. He loves cruising now. Well, in fact, he doesn't want to do anything else, which is hard. You can't cruise all your life. Although I did read something the other day. This was really cool. I think it's an English couple, and I'll have to send it to you. They did their figures on whether a nursing home, they must be entering the later years of their life, maybe they're 80-something, and they did the figures on a nursing home compared to booking. I think they booked 50 cruises for the rest of their life.
Wow. Oh, and let me guess, it was cheaper to spend the time on the cruise ships than it was.
Yeah, but you're fully looked after. Like, you had a cabin person with you the whole time, which would be like a carer.
Yeah. Gosh, that's amazing. So I think you're
too young to do that. We can't. We won't add up. No.
Oh, I'd get bored with that now. But what I think potentially having an experience on a cruise is something I would be open to. If you'd asked me that a few years ago, I would have categorically said no. In my 40s and early 50s, I would have said no. I'm not, cruising isn't for me. It's not something that I particularly appeals. But I think, having chatted to you, and we chatted before you went on the cruise, because obviously we're talking about what was involved in it, and because I was interested in exactly what that cruise was going to be like, because I guess I have preconceived ideas. So it's been good to chat to you afterwards as well about how you found it. and obviously how your son and husband have had their experiences over the last couple of years and how it's kind of influenced their, especially your husband's kind of thoughts on traveling for the future. And I definitely think it has a place.
And as a storyteller, like I have to look at what angles I can get from that cruise. And there is so much content. Like I was interviewing the entertainment director who had an amazing story, the chefs who have amazing stories, like, I don't know, there was just so much content, and then you've got every single destination as well. So I didn't struggle in the sense of writing stories, which was important. But yeah, I definitely think the right cruising is the way to go. And if you can get a cruise, a boat that is going to be sustainable as well. Like something that I did say to Azamara on the way out, because they were still using plastic bottles, and they mentioned to me that's just what their client wants. And so I wanted to end this podcast actually, Trace, by saying, as a guest of a cruise boat, think more about it. Think you can take your own bottle on and fill up at water stations. So they were sort of saying to me that's not what the guests wanted. So, there's a lot of Americans on board, and I would suggest that they do start thinking about taking their own bottle if they want to see, the planet surviving and cruising into the future. I don't know. We need to think about plastic on boats.
I think that's a good point, and potentially that's a really good point for the cruise ships when people are booking and they're giving them suggestions of what to bring on board. I don't know if they do, but that sort of thing. That suggestion should be made. I think that potentially this is what you need to bring. This would be a good idea to pack. I'm going on a couple of tours in India, and those suggestions have been made about what would be sensible, sustainable, and and obviously water bottle is kind of one of those things that really we should all be traveling with now instead of purchasing plastic bottles everywhere. So I think that's a really good point. And again, I think the cruise ships have a responsibility in that education as well. Yeah. And I'm hoping next year we both get the opportunity to go and do a cruise, whether that's with Azamara or another cruise company, because I would really love as well through this podcast to be talking to, as you say, sharing the stories, not only of the people who are working on the ships, but those various destinations and the impact, positive, negative, whatever the impact is of having the cruise ships in their destinations.
You know what? You'll be doing Croatia and you'll be eating all your words that you said at the start of the podcast. And the other thing is, we don't wear lanyards anymore, because I was like, oh my God, I've got a lanyard on, and there's no lanyards. It's fine. It's all good. Azamara is incredibly thoughtful, curated, and I didn't feel bothered about coming in on a ship, which I was wondering, because I would have been standing on the land watching the ships come in, having a little bit of a sneer at them. But I didn't feel like that coming to Azamara. Although some of the other ones, and I believe I won't go on those ships, no.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. All right. Well, thanks so much, Kylie, for joining us for this week's episode of the Global Travel Planner podcast. It was great talking to you as always.
Don't section me off as just a cruiser, though, because I'm definitely traveling senorita on the ground.
I was going to say, don't worry. We'll get you. We're going to disembark you from the cruise ship, and then we will bring you on the podcast very soon to talk about traveling senorita and your travels on the land rather than on the sea, Kylie.
Thanks, Trace.
Show notes for this week's episode can be found at tracystravelsintown.com/episode 10. Until next episode, happy global travel planning.